All right, everybody, can y'all hear me? Let's do a quick video and sound check because I have done many live shots for CNN and Fox News throughout the course of my career, but this is the very first time I've ever done a live stream for my YouTube channel from my home studio. So please let me know if you guys can hear and see everything, and then we will get started. I want to make sure, Avi, that folks can hear us before we get going. So bear with me. Can y'all see me? Let me just get some comments in the chat, making sure everything looks good, and then we're off and running. Okay, great. We're getting yeses. Sweet. All right, you guys. So I am truly honored to have Harvard professor and astrophysicist Avi Loeb back on the Endless Void. Avi, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's my privilege to join you, Christine. I really enjoyed our previous encounter.
I did too. And, for those of y'all that don't know, Avi and I actually flew to Boston and went to Avi's home. You were kind enough to spend an afternoon with me, and we sat down and really had a nice, like 90-minute long conversation. And I'll admit it, I was a little skeptical going into the conversation just about some of the claims that you were making or hypotheses that you were floating, because they are so big, right? The implications for humanity are so big. But you really, you persuaded me. You persuaded me to think with more of an open mind. So thank you for that, Avi. And I want to spend the next hour catching up from our conversation back in August. We said in August that we were going to do a catch up in October. Right. It's November. We're a few days late, so bear with us. And then I'm going to open it up to some of the people in the chat, because everybody has a lot of questions for you.
That's wonderful. I look forward to that.
Okay, great. So Avi, first, when I sat down with you in August, you said that you put 3I Atlas, this mysterious interstellar object, at a 4 on the Loeb scale, 0 being it's a natural object, 10 being it's extraterrestrial technology. So a 40% chance that it's alien tech. After everything you have seen since August, has your prediction, your forecast changed, or do you still put it at 40%?
Actually, I was just asked this question on Fox News just a few minutes ago.
My old stomping ground.
And the point of the matter is that, we are on a blind date with this object from interstellar space. And as I always advise young people on a blind date, listen to the other side before you have an opinion. Observe the other side. And we just have a few more weeks to observe this object before making an opinion about it. Because what happened to it recently is quite startling. Actually, on October 29th, it passed closest to the sun. Now, we couldn't see it because it was on the opposite side of the sun relative to Earth, perhaps for a reason, we don't know. But at any event, the excessive heat from the sun did something to it, because there were 770 watts per square meter deposited on the surface of the object. And that's sufficient to evaporate any kind of ice. We couldn't see it from Earth, but there were orbiters around the sun. These are solar observatories, such as Stereo, SOHO, and GOES 19. These are 3 of them. And they reported data a few days ago, and they observed it to get brighter very quickly, very rapidly, much more so than any other comet in history. So it's really getting brighter inversely with distance from the sun to the 7.5 power, extremely steep dependence. And then it was bluer than the sun when they observed it. Now, blue usually means hot. Cool objects are red. Obviously, the surface of 3I Atlas is it's somewhere between the orbit of the Earth and the orbit of Mars from the sun. So it's relatively cool, 20 times cooler than the surface of the sun. And so why should it appear bluer than the sun? Another possibility to explain it in terms of a natural process is that perhaps these are carbon monoxide molecules that lost an electron. These are they have transitions in the blue, so maybe that's the source of the blue color. But of course, it might be a very hot engine if it's a spacecraft. And the other thing that was detected over the past few days is non-gravitational acceleration. That's very exciting. Because previously, I looked at 4,000 data points from 227 observatories around the globe that observed it over the past 5 months. And the trajectory did not deviate from what you expect based on gravity alone. But now, close to perihelion, close to the sun, it apparently deviated significantly. That was data obtained by the ALMA Observatory in Chile that is observing it at the millimeter wavelength. And there was non-gravitational acceleration. It was displaced relative to the expected path, but by 4 arc seconds in right ascension. So it's very significant deviation. And given that non-gravitational acceleration, I calculated immediately that the object must have lost a substantial fraction of its mass, somewhere around 15%, or a sixth of its mass, and that means that there should be a very massive cloud of gas around it. If it's a comet, if it's a natural comet, there should be about 5 billion tons of gas right now around it. And since it's a major fraction of its original mass, it means that by observing it, this cloud of gas, we can infer what the object is, because it's not just the skin of the object that was ripped apart. It's actually a substantial portion of the object, and maybe it even broke into pieces. Now, this is the scenario that is required to explain the non-gravitational acceleration in the context of a natural comet. However, if there was some engine that provided the propulsion that led to this non-gravitational acceleration, first of all, you would expect a spacecraft to do that closest to the sun, because then it takes advantage of the gravitational assist by the sun. That's what we do with our spacecraft. And secondly, we won't see this very massive cloud of gas around it in the coming weeks. So there is a very simple test now. If we see a massive cloud of gas that amounts to a substantial fraction of the mass of the object, and if we see it that it disintegrated, because very often comets are glued together by ice that can easily melt, and then you end up with fragments. We saw that with previous examples of Shoemaker-Levy 9 that broke into a sequence of fragments that were easily visible near Jupiter. So in this case, let's say wait a few more weeks, and then I would either revise. I told the presenter, I said, within a few weeks, I would either revise it to 0 on the Loeb scale or to 10, depending on what we see. If we don't,
so where is it right now? Still
right
a 4?
now, I don't change my previous rank, because I don't have any data on what happened to it when it was subjected to this stress. When you interrogate a person, you often put them under psychological stress that helps to figure out their nature. And the same happened to this object near the sun. And we just need
perihelion.
At perihelion, and we just need to wait a few more weeks, because right now it's too close to the sun for us to look at it. But in a week or two, it should be a piece of cake. And then, hundreds of observatories from the Earth would be able to observe it. Actually, there is an international asteroid a warning network that is under the auspices of the United Nations, and they announced that they will have a campaign between the 27th of November until the 27th of January, just observing it and getting the most data possible. So I think we will know for sure by the holidays, by Christmas time, what it is. And it
what
will
a
come
gift that would be.
Sorry, it will come closest to Earth on December 19th. That's when.
That's my daughter's birthday, actually.
Oh, wonderful. Let's hope that we will not get a gift on that day that we don't want here on Earth.
I think she might be excited if it were something along the lines of what you're talking about. Avi, let me ask you a question from Enigma podcast. Sorry if I got that wrong. But I think it's really timely to what you're talking about right now. Here she says, Professor Loeb, with all these additional anomalies, wouldn't it be consistent to raise the scale to 5 from 4?
It might be, but I just want to wait a few more weeks. Now, you have to understand, and we can talk about it, that NASA had the best, the highest resolution image that was taken on October 2nd with a high-rise camera on board the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter when 3I Atlas came within 30 million kilometers from Mars. It's the highest resolution because of the proximity of the object to the camera. And the government shutdown started a day earlier. So NASA says, we can't release that data because of the government shutdown. To me, it sounds a bit unprofessional because, science should not be sabotaged by politics. I just find it really unfortunate that they're not willing to release the data. At the same time, there was a tweet from Kim Kardashian.
I was hoping you were going to get to this.
To the acting administrator of NASA, Sean Duffy.
Duffy.
Yeah, a few days ago. And he immediately responded. She said, what is the T about 3I Atlas? With many question marks and exclamation marks. And he said, it's nothing to do with aliens. It's just a comet. And, he responded immediately. But I was corresponding with Representative Anna Paulina Luna.
Mm-hmm.
She's brilliant, and she actually volunteered to write a letter to Sean Duffy, an official letter from Congress, which he received last Friday, and should have responded to that before responding to a celebrity, I think. Because at least in the context of NASA, it's not in the entertainment business. It's more about doing science to the best of their ability to lead the world in space exploration. And so, in my view, they have a duty to the scientific community.
Well, and they're funded by taxpayers.
Exactly. So I'm a little bit surprised that he found the time to respond to Kim Kardashian before responding to Representative Luna and to me as a scientist.
Two things, Avi, and I'm just going to in our previous interview, people got so upset when I simply brought up what other people were saying. And just like it's your job as a scientist to kind of question things and try to keep a very open mind, I view my role as a journalist to kind of present the opposing view so that you can then answer it. So
that's
what I'm doing here. Okay.
That's perfectly fine. And I should tell you my point of view. I don't really depend on how many likes I get. This is really not what motivates me.
Okay.
If you want a simple model for how I think, just think about a kid. I mean, I haven't changed much since I was a kid. I just wonder about the world. And obviously, when I was younger, I was troubled when people just didn't let me wonder and ask questions out of curiosity. Now I don't really care about what other people say because I don't need them, their approval, And so you can ask me anything. As I told Joe Rogan last week, my skin is made of titanium. I don't really care much about.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. And I also want y'all to know, I did ask Avi what I should call him. Professor Loeb, Mr. Loeb. A lot of people thought I was being unprofessional by just calling you Avi, but Avi says it's fine to call him Avi. So, Avi, let me ask you my next question and just kind of play the devil's advocate here because, from NASA's perspective, what they're saying is we're furloughed, right? There's a government shutdown going on. We're furloughed. We don't have the typical NASA employees in the building to get this data out or convey this information to the members of the press. You're not okay with that explanation or that answer. And Isaac Taylor asks a question, why can we not see images from the high-rise camera on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter through the University of Arizona?
Exactly.
I think that's a great question.
No, that's exactly my point. That's exactly my point because the principal investigator is an employee, is a professor at the University of Arizona. Now, of course, he might be under contract with NASA, but someone at the top of the administration of NASA needs to, use common sense and say, well, this is an opportunity for public relations for NASA in the future. NASA is funded by taxpayers, and it makes a lot of. It doesn't cost much money to share the data with the public. In fact, there are lots of images that are shared with the public, also from the rovers on the surface of Mars. So why wouldn't these particular images that are of great value? And I should explain that they are of great value not only because the pixel resolution is 30 kilometers, the best we have, 3 times better than the Hubble images that were obtained on July 21st, simply because the Hubble Space Telescope was too far from the object. But here, the distance was much closer, and we have 30 kilometers per pixel resolution. But moreover, the Hubble looked at the object when it was approaching it, edge on, so to speak. And that was very close to the direction between the sun and the object. So we couldn't really tell the three-dimensional structure of the mass loss that it has and the glow around it. There was a glow extended towards the sun. On the other hand, when it came close to Mars, we could have, the high-rise camera could have taken a sideways image of it, so we could get a much better sense of how the outflowing material is reflecting sunlight around it. So it has values for many reasons. And in fact, I have a collaborator that we are really eager to analyze that data, but it's not being shared. And there is no need for a press conference, for a release to the press. It's just a matter of sharing the data with scientists. Doesn't cost anything, straightforward. You have the data, you just put it on a repository that is publicly available, and let scientists work with it. There is nothing really complicated in doing that. And you don't need to employ any furloughed NASA employee for that. You can just ask even a graduate student to do it for you at the University of Arizona.
And so just to put a fine point on it, what do you think the issue is here? Put the government shutdown aside. A lot of people think, conspiracy theories. Like, do you think there is something conspiratorial here, or is this just bureaucratic inefficiency? It kind of gets to Francesco's question here. He says, if NASA is deliberately withholding information, do you think NASA's deliberately withholding information? I'd be curious to get your take on that.
No, I don't. Well, I think it's someone is using it. Someone in the leadership of NASA is using it to make a political point that, the fact that there is this government shutdown, could cause pain. And in this case, pain for the science community. It should be felt because we want to end this. And we want also to blame the other side of the political spectrum for that. So I'm not sure where they come from, which side, and who they want to blame. But someone is trying to play politics with this point. To me, this has to do with politics taking over priority over science. And the reason that this is important for science is that it's time sensitive. If we have access to that data, we could plan better future observations. We can understand the object better and then interpret future results better. So it's not as if, in 3 months' time, it wouldn't really matter. It would matter because we can observe the object in the coming weeks based on what we already know and interpret it better. So I just think it's inappropriate for whoever bureaucrat decided to do that. I don't think it's a signature of a conspiracy where they have some evidence for extraterrestrial intelligence. As I pointed out, it's most likely evidence for terrestrial stupidity.
Terrestrial stupidity. I love that. What about ESA in China? Do you feel like they should be, ESA, European Space Agency, do you feel like they should be sharing more information about 3i Atlas?
Well, no, the ESA actually did share the information within a few days. They had inferior equipment that took these images, and so they are not very informative. They don't give us a lot of information. The camera they used is lower quality. So it's really the high-rise camera that is unique in its size. It's 50 centimeters in diameter. So it gives us much better images than what the Europeans have. They were completely straightforward with that. Then the Chinese, or, there is an Indian, there are other countries that have orbiters around the sun and around the Mars, but unfortunately their equipment, their cameras are not as good as high-rise. So it's really NASA's camera that leads the way much better than anyone else. And it was, and it still is, an opportunity for NASA to celebrate its abilities that are unprecedented, are not replicated by other space agencies. But unfortunately, they don't take advantage of that.
This one's from Patrick. He says, Professor Loeb, given the unreleased NASA data on 3I Atlas, which measurable signatures would best distinguish natural cometary non-gravitational behavior from a potentially artificial maneuver? What are you looking for there?
Right. So in the case of a comet, we know what to expect because the only method of propulsion is the rocket effect. When the comet is losing mass in the sun-facing side because it's being warmed by sunlight, as a result of that, it gets a recoil in the opposite direction. That's the way that a jet plane travels. By ejecting gas backwards, it's propelled forward. And a comet, that does the same thing. There are pockets of ices on the surface of the comet that are not covering it uniformly, and you end up getting jets, small jets of basically these volatiles being vaporized by the sunlight, sublimated. So what happens is the ice goes straight into gas because in order to have liquid, you need some external pressure. There is no pressure in the Earth. On Earth, when water ice, for example, gets warmed up, it turns into a liquid. But that's because there is an atmosphere, an external pressure. If you don't have an external an atmosphere or pressure, then the ice sublimates straight into gas. That's what happens, on the surface of Mars, for example, where we don't have a very dense atmosphere. So we can only find right now just water ice hidden under the surface. There used to be liquid water on Mars when it had an atmosphere. So 3I Atlas is not massive enough to retain an atmosphere. There is no atmosphere. So all the ices on the surface, turn immediately into gas if they are warmed up by sunlight. And you end up with those jets of vapor coming out of the surface of the object and pushing it in the opposite direction. That's the way comets are propelled. Now, I did a simple calculation, which is based on momentum conservation. The momentum carried by the vapor is giving a push to the object. And there is a very simple use of the rocket equation that tells you that the time that it would take to basically destroy the entire object, to vaporize all the mass that the object carries, that time is related to the ejection speed of the gas out of its surface, divided by the measured acceleration. That's the characteristic time to basically obliterate the object. And I found that it's 6 months. And so the object spent about a month near perihelion. So that means that it lost at least a sixth of its mass. And that was a conservative estimate that I made. So that's a huge amount of mass. It's 5 billion tons of gas that should be around it and should make it very bright and also, very visible. And so once it comes away from the sun, out of the sun, as far as observatories on Earth are concerned, we should be able to see that as a very bright halo or a cometary tail. It doesn't. At any event, the object itself lost a lot of its content. And then not only that we can see that it's a comet, but also we can diagnose what the material is made of, because you basically this material was taken out of the object and it's now in the form of a cloud of gas. Now, if we don't see this massive gas cloud, then obviously it was something else that gave it the propulsion, and it would be really difficult to avoid the conclusion that this something else is not cometary evaporation. Because you can't avoid the rocket equation of comet evaporation, and if it's an engine, an engine could be far more efficient than cometary evaporation, because you can inject the gas at a much higher speed. For example, you don't need a lot of mass, so the fuel can be far more efficient. And so let's just see what happens in the coming weeks. Do we see a very dense and massive cloud of gas around it? That would be the litmus test as to the nature of the object.
And so you keep saying like we'll watch in the coming weeks. So
Yes,
you think it's safe to say by December at the latest we will know for sure whether or not it's a good old fashioned comet or of natural origin or something else. That
I think so.
December's the date.
Yeah, I think so. I think
Okay.
during the month of November, starting from the middle of November, we should start getting a flood of data from Earth-based observatories. And yeah, and towards the end of November, probably, hopefully, the data will be released. And so at that point, we should be able to see that very massive cloud of gas. So, that's the beauty of science, that eventually we will be guided by whatever the observations tell us. We don't need to have an opinion to start with. And unfortunately, including, Sean Duffy, he expressed very strong opinion to Kim Kardashian without having that data. So I don't understand. I mean, obviously, he ignores all the anomalies of this object. I can sort of list them, but there are lots of peculiarities of this object, starting from the fact that it moves in the plane of the planets. You cannot dismiss that, because you would expect an object to arrive at a random angle, but somehow this object selected the plane of the planets as if it was designed to do some reconnaissance mission near the planets. And also, it's a very massive object, 1,000,000 times more massive than the first interstellar object, which raises a lot of doubts as to how you get so much mass packed in this package that arrived to us within a decade of us observing the sky. That these things are extremely rare, such massive objects.
Avi, I've got a question, and then I'll get back to everybody else's. When do you have time to do all this? Like, you're talking about doing some calculations. Like, are you doing this on the back of a napkin? Like, because you're traveling, you're going all over the place, but you're doing like sometimes multiple Medium blog posts a day on top of your day job. Like, how do you structure your day? How do
Well,
you
I work
do all
nonstop.
this?
I work nonstop, and the main challenge right now is I'm getting hundreds of emails from a lot of people, and I have to go through them just to figure out if they're meaningful or not. And that takes, I cannot use an AI bot to do it for me at this point, because
Can you hire an assistant?
no, because it would take actually more time. So I have to go through those. But and just a week ago, I had this podcast interview with Joe Rogan, and a day later, I went to a NASCAR car race in California, where one of the racers put my image along with 3i Atlas on the hood of his car, and that was an interesting experience. I learned how to drive a race car. Now they want me to go to the next NASCAR race and participate. And my wife says, "No way, you're not taking that risk."
What do you mean participate? Like get in the car or drive?
Drive the car, yes.
Can you drive a stick shift? It's a stick shift, right?
Sorry?
It's a stick shift, right? Like, do
Yes,
you know how to drive a NASCAR
it's a stick shift. Yeah, of course, because
I would not.
I'm old enough to remember those cars, and I drove in them early on. I was actually born on a farm, so I drove a tractor with a stick when I was young. And so actually he asked me, "Are you familiar with a stick?" And I said, "Of course." I mean, that back then cars were with a stick. And it's just fun, but it's also risky, because so I probably will not do it. But at any event, that was just last weekend, and then as soon as I came back, there were about I would say on average this week up to 8 interviews a day, to podcast, to television, and I find it important to convey my message. And actually, Joe Rogan discussed me with Elon Musk on Friday, on a few days after my podcast. So it's interesting. My life is interesting because people do listen. And when I put out essays on medium.com, I get between 50 to 200,000 views for each of these essays, which is great. I mean, I'm not a member of any news organization, and nevertheless, people are eager to read those.
Well, that's the power of independent journalism and independent media these days, right? You and I both are finally getting to take advantage of it.
Right. But I should say the biggest thrill I get is, there was an email that I received from a former pilot of the U.S. Air Force who said, because of you, my daughter wants to become a scientist. That's what he wrote to me.
Ah,
And her name is Ariana. And so I said, this is wonderful to hear. And so I put it in one of my essays. And then he wrote to me another email saying, I just heard a very loud noise from my daughter's room. And I went up. I thought there was a wild animal that entered her room. Turns out that she noticed your essay on Medium, and she was thrilled to see herself being mentioned there. So then I mentioned her also on Joe Rogan's podcast, and as soon as she learned about it, and the principal of her school decided to share that with the entire school. So now she's a celebrity, but I really am happy about the fact that she will end up hopefully becoming a scientist. She's also good at soccer, one of my favorite sports. And a similar experience was with a London Times reporter that wrote a report about my research, and then he read it to his kids, and they told him that they want to become scientists. So, I mean, there are two aspects to it. One is that for some reason, this subject inspires young kids to enter science. And this is a great opportunity, because how often do you see a subject that scientists investigate that is so attractive to kids? There aren't many, and if we discover a new particle in the Large Hadron Collider, I don't think kids will decide to become scientists as a result. This is an opportunity to attract them, and that's very important. But the second point is, somehow many people in academia are completely blind to that. They basically don't want to discuss this subject, and when I discuss it, they attack me for doing that. And they are missing the point that I resonate with the public, with young kids that may become scientists. This is an opportunity to actually give science a good reputation, because if we admit out of humility that we don't know the answer in advance, instead of pretending to know the answer, instead of showing off as the authority that tells the public the truth, the way that Sean Duffy told Kim Kardashian, this is a comet, and it's not a matter of authority. Okay, if you think it's a comet, explain all these anomalies that I was referring to. There are 9 of them, and you should explain them if you are sure that it's a comet. Otherwise, you should always regard it as a learning experience and say, this is great, let's collect more data before we figure it out. And that is the honest way of communicating with the public. And the public understands it. It's just that my colleagues in academia do not understand it, that the acting director acting administrator of NASA prefers to pretend that he knows the answer.
Well, I think what was so interesting to me after my conversation with you in August was, in preparing for that interview, I really read your papers and read your blog posts, and didn't just go off the headlines and the articles and the little snippets that I'd seen of you on social media. And you have been very consistent from the moment this interstellar object was discovered on July 1st, 2025, in that you have said the most likely outcome is that it is a natural object of some kind, most likely a comet, but that there is a chance that it is some sort of extraterrestrial technology, and therefore it's a chance that we should at least talk about or explore,
Exactly.
or have a thought exercise about this until we know with 100% certainty. And
Yeah,
I don't know how you can argue with that. That makes so much sense to me.
well,
Go ahead.
it's really important. I need to emphasize that the implications would be huge to humanity if it turns out to be alien technology. And in the intelligence agencies, it's well known that sometimes there are low probability events, but they take them very seriously because of the implications. And the scientific community is missing that point as well, because they think of adapting the most likely interpretation. Now, this is completely fair in the context of an exploding star billions of light years away. It will have no impact on society, on our life. But if there is an event that could have an interpretation that will have a huge impact on our life, with a small probability, you must consider it. You must take it seriously. That is well known in politics, in the context of national security. You have to consider rare events because of their large implication. It was also recognized by the philosopher Blaise Pascal, who said, we must discuss God, because even though you might assign a low probability to its existence, the implications of God existing would be huge to your life. So therefore, you must think about it. And so that's a completely fair way of looking at it. Somehow the scientists miss it. They want to always subscribe to the most likely explanation, but you can't do that, and you can't dismiss interpretations that have huge impacts, and they are not used to whatever they study having a huge impact on society. So I'm saying they're missing that point as well. In addition to the point about outreach to the public, they're missing this one. And with respect to me, when I got married to my wife, I said, you can trust me. I will not try to cheat or because the problem with cheating is that you always have to remember what you said and be consistent with that if you are lying, right? So that is a lot of work. And it's much easier to stick to the truth because it's always consistent. If you're honest, you don't need to remember what you said before. You can just know what the facts are and repeat them again and again. It doesn't really matter what you said before. And this is the approach I take in the context of science. And anything I say is sort of consistent because I'm not trying to manipulate people. I'm not trying to tell people something they might want to hear. I don't care how many likes I have. I just am consistent with what I say. Now,
you are very consistent. Avi, can you see these questions beneath the screen? I've got one for you from
Yes.
Android Paranormal. They want to know, are there any theories on how the universe could create a comet with such unusual elemental makeup, such as 3I Atlas or of this comet? But we're not saying it's a comet. So that's why I changed it to 3I Atlas.
Yeah, so let's address various aspects. There are several aspects to this elemental makeup. One of them is that the most abundant element in the plume of gas that was detected by the Webb telescope is carbon dioxide, and that's 87% by mass. And if you want to make an object that is made mostly of carbon dioxide, you can do that. If you have a star, there is a certain distance from the star where water ice forms. It's called the snow line, the water snow line. That's the distance where water ice can form. And of course, closer, the ice would either evaporate or turn into liquid, depending on whether there is an atmosphere. And so in order to get water ice, you need to be far enough from the star. If you get farther than that, you can get to the carbon dioxide ice line, snow line. And in principle, if you make an object over there, then it will be made mostly of carbon dioxide ice, less so. Usually, it could potentially be a mix of water and carbon dioxide, but maybe, in the case of 3A Atlas, it was 4% water by mass, 87% carbon dioxide, and the rest, 9% or so, was carbon monoxide. So maybe you can make such an object with a very unusual composition by creating it in the outer part of a planetary system, much farther away than the water snow line. But in the solar system, we haven't seen such a high ratio of carbon dioxide to water. And in fact, most quote-unquote experts were saying, as soon as the object was discovered, that it must be water-rich. And then there were even a couple of research teams that claimed we discovered water. And I looked at the data, and it was very noisy in one paper, and also inconclusive in the other paper, because I thought they were not honest with the numbers there. And so I said, no, this is not evidence. Something in the analysis was incorrect. They had press releases about it. I was attacked personally, as if I don't understand what they're doing, and how dare I speak about the work of experts. And then, as is the case in science, you can't fool everyone all of the time, But, so the Webb telescope looked at the composition of the gas cloud around the object and found that it's only 4% water, which was basically my point, that these people claim that it's mostly water, and it's not. So at any event, indeed, the composition is unusual. The other aspect which is unusual is there is nickel with very little iron. And I should correct here something that Elon Musk said to Joe Rogan when they spoke about me on Friday, just a few days ago. So Joe Rogan said, what about this object, 3I Atlas? It has much more nickel than iron. And Elon Musk said, well, it's not so unusual. There are asteroids that have a lot of nickel. And of course, they have a lot of nickel, but those that are nickel rich are also iron rich. The issue is not if you have a lot of nickel in the asteroid. The point is that whenever you have a lot of nickel, you also have a lot of iron. And in the case of 3I Atlas, the nickel to iron ratio was much more extreme than ever seen. The only other place where we saw such an extreme ratio is in industrially produced nickel alloys. So there is this process by which we separate nickel from alloy. It's called the carbonyl process that industries use. It's very well known. And the authors of the papers that discovered the nickel in 3I Atlas said, they wrote, well, maybe the carbonyl process operates in nature. We've never seen it. This is the first time. And I'm just saying this could be a technological signature if we see it. Now, I should also clarify, because Elon Musk said, oh, if it's made of nickel, it will obliterate a region when it impacts something like the Earth. But it's not made mostly of nickel. There was only 1 part in 30,000 nickel relative to carbon dioxide. So the amount of mass loss in nickel was measured to be 5 grams per second. And in carbon dioxide, close to 100 kilograms per second. So it's very different. The total mass loss is 150 kilograms per second, and nickel makes only 5 grams per second out of that. So it's not made mostly of nickel. It's just that we found nickel with very little iron, which is very puzzling. Now, if you ask where did it come from, I don't know. I mean, the conjecture is that maybe nature is doing what we do in our industries. And I say, how do we know? We don't know that.
Avi, how about this question from Kyber? Is it still possible for 3I Atlas to slow down and enter the Earth's vicinity, or has that window of opportunity already passed?
It can definitely do that, because it came on a retrograde trajectory, meaning it moved around the sun in the opposite direction to the planets. So all it needs to do is slow down and basically get down to the trajectory of the Earth. It was passing within 50 million kilometers from the orbit of the Earth around the sun, except that we were on the opposite side of the sun when it came. So it could, but I think that a more likely scenario, I mean, this is a massive object. It makes much more sense if it wants to do a reconnaissance mission for it to release mini probes that will target the planet. So the mini probe can maneuver. Now, the question is, can we see those mini probes if it's technological? And the answer is only if they're as big as a football field. We can see them across a distance comparable to the Earth-Sun separation. When they come very close to Earth, we might be able to see them if they're much smaller than that. I should say that the Starship, our biggest rocket, is less than the size of a football field. It's like less than 100 meters with all the fuel that it carries. So in terms of our gadgets, we never launched anything bigger than a football field. And by the way, this object itself is the size of a city. And if it's technological, it's really non-trivial to imagine how you can launch such a giant thing, a very massive thing, and how do you power it? So if someone did it, they have access to technology that are well beyond what we can imagine. And the question is, what's inside of it? And presumably, such a big object can produce its own artificial gravity by having a spinning internal part. And all of this was imagined by science fiction writers. For example, Arthur C. Clarke had this novel, Rendezvous with Rama, where Rama was a cylindrical spacecraft roughly the size of 3I Atlas, tens of kilometers in size.
While we're kind of doing these thought exercises, I want to ask this question. It was actually my first question that somebody left today. And it's actually a question that I was talking to my dad a bit about, because I think it's something that a lot of people question. And that is, if this were to be of technological origin, or if not this one, another one that comes in 10, 20, 100 years, why would someone travel for 30 years just for a glimpse? You know,
You
what would
know,
the point be?
well, that's a good question. I should say that this morning I was asked on Times Radio from London. They said, well, this object entered the solar system, the outskirts of the Oort cloud, 8,000 years ago. So if there were any passengers or pilots of this object, are they at least 8,000 years old? You know, that I said, I have no clue as to what's inside of it. I don't want to guess. It could be operated by AI. That doesn't need to be biological creatures if it's technological. Whatever is being used could be far more imaginative than the script writers in Hollywood. I don't think we can base our guesses on the experiences we had on Earth. We are just like large language models, LLMs, that you train on some data set. So we were trained on a data set limited to this Earth. That's the data set that we're familiar with. So we imagine aliens looking like us, doing things. But in reality, the training data set of the universe is far richer. And we were never exposed to that. So it's really difficult for us to imagine, especially if you deal with a technological civilization that had much more than a century of science and technology. They could reach advances that we cannot imagine. Our science is still...
Our little human brains, our puny human brains.
Exactly. That's another thing, that our human brain is limited to the metabolism of our body. It uses 20% of the power of our body. And it's also, just 20 watts. And just imagine that on another planet near another star, there are creatures that are intelligent, that are far bigger in their body size, and therefore their brains are bigger and more complex. And in principle, those that are able to reach us are probably the most accomplished siblings that we have. And the others, they must be very dumb creatures that were born next to other stars, and they don't survive very long. They either kill each other or they get ruined by some catastrophe, and so they just disappear. But those that are able to leave some monuments that reach us, spacecraft that can reach us, those are the most accomplished ones. And my guess is they're quite different than us in the sense that they don't engage in conflicts. I mean, we are attracted to conflicts. Just look at what
humanity is attracted to conflicts.
Yeah, and that's not a sign of intelligence. I really think it's really unfortunate, because we are wasting a lot of resources on fighting each other,
and a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, also we are fighting over territories. We are fighting mostly over prestige and who does better, and that's really unfortunate, because if we were to combine our forces and work together, cooperate, we could have, humanity could have reached great heights. We have $2.4 trillion being spent every year on military budgets. Just imagine taking $1 trillion a year, putting it to space exploration, and putting the most accomplished architects, scientists, entrepreneurs on a project whose goal is to construct a platform in space that carries people to beyond the solar system. This would be the monument that will have us remembered in cosmic history. Whatever we do on this planet, nobody would care. If we die, there is nobody that will mourn us. No historians of the Milky Way galaxy will remember us. Our history, will be remembered only if we send out monuments, meaning spacecraft, habitats that carry humans. And all we can think about, the most visionary concept we have as of now, if you think about Elon Musk trying to use his fortune, he's trying to bring people from one rock that has oceans, lakes, rivers, to a desert that is a terrible environment called Mars. That's the biggest vision that we have about space. Like, this is amazing. That's not so amazing. You move from one rock to another rock. From a cosmic perspective, It's really not very visionary. What is visionary is to build space platforms that provide a habitat for humans to survive for long periods of time in space, carrying them away from this Earth, because the Earth itself in 7.6 billion years will be engulfed by the sun and will be burned up. And even before that, in 1 billion years, it will lose all of its atmosphere because the sun will get brighter. So it will lose its liquid water on the surface. It will become a desert like Mars. And obviously, long before that, we might actually disappear because of self-inflicted wounds triggered by either nuclear weapons or AI. I mean, the biggest risk of AI, I don't think, is that AI will control the world or do things to humans. It will just, create, enter into our mind in a way that humans will be self-destructive. It will polarize society or create some sense of craziness in our mindset. And that's, I think, the biggest risk of AI, that it affects humans in unproductive ways, unhealthy ways. And I really worry about it. I see students already not thinking, they don't have critical thinking.
Because you can just go straight to ChatGPT and type something in, and
and
not
this
have
is
to
really
do
important
the research yourself anymore.
because they don't really know the truth. They can go and protest and even shoot bullets into other crowds of people just because of what they learned from ChatGPT. That's really inappropriate.
Avi, quick question from Max. And Max, I think we already answered this at the beginning. In fact, I know we did, but since a lot of people have joined since then, the question is, Dr. Loeb, based on your scale, the Loeb scale, are you still standing in 4 out of 1 to 10, 0 being it's just a comet of natural origin, 10 being it's aliens and extraterrestrial
Yes,
intelligence?
I'm
And you
still,
said you're sticking with the 4, right?
I stick with the 4, and I should say also
Okay.
that yesterday I had an article that I posted on Medium that talks about the revolution of interstellar objects, how revolutionary they would be in science, and how much we can learn from them. And just one thing we can learn, aside from new technologies of other civilizations, if we were to have to intercept an interstellar object, suppose 3I Atlas happened to be just a natural object, and we were able to land on it, scoop some material, 100 grams or so, the way that the OSIRIS-REx mission extracted material from the asteroid Bennu, and bring it back to Earth for analysis. We can figure out if the building blocks of life as we know it exist around other stars. And it's not by observing from a distance, it's actually by having material samples. And it would take us millions to billions of years to deliver such material samples from other stars. And here we have a visitor that spent all this time, millions to billions of years, traveling to us, to our backyard. It's an opportunity to excavate them and figure out what happens near other stars, even if they are natural. This is something that the astrobiology community did not recognize as of yet. They keep insisting on a vision to invest more than $10 billion in searching for the chemical fingerprints of microbes near, in the atmospheres of exoplanets. And I'm saying there is a different way of accomplishing the same goal of learning about life elsewhere, which is to examine the making of interstellar objects.
And isn't that kind of what the Galileo Project is trying to be the opposite of, rather than look for microbial signatures of life elsewhere? You're trying to look for the bigger things with your future arrays of telescopes.
No,
is that
Galileo
right?
Project is basically focusing on objects that are within the Earth's atmosphere. And the question is any of them technological? And we just inaugurated a new observatory in Las Vegas on top of the Sphere. I mentioned it in the Joe Rogan show. And that's an amazing place. I went there over the summer. It was really thrilling to get to the top of the Sphere, which is a construction that is about 130 meters high, and we went all the way to the top and put a freckle on top of that sphere, which is the small observatory of the Galileo Project. And we have 2 other units that are separated from it by 10 kilometers that help us look at objects in the sky from different directions so that we can pinpoint their distance, their velocity, their acceleration. So the question is, does any object that we find, and we will look at millions of them, is any of them moving outside the flight characteristics envelope of human-made technologies, and hopefully we'll know. And the point is that even if we don't find any evidence for extraterrestrial technologies by looking for objects, and by the way, that's motivated by the government admitting that they have UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena. Even if we don't find any, I feel that we didn't waste our time, because the Department of War can potentially use the sensors, the software that we develop to identify drones from adversarial nations. So I think that is obviously a project worth doing, either for the benefit of national security or for the benefit of science if we find something.
Avi, do we have time for one more question?
Yes,
Or do you have
definitely.
another interview that you've got to jump to?
Yes.
This is a question that people ask me a lot about you and other things in the UFO UAP community. Question from Will, and it is: have you been forced to hide information apart from what you say publicly?
No, there are two things. First, I was never exposed to classified information that the government may have. If they ever show it to me, I would love to help them figure it out. If it's not human made, and some people claim the government is in possession of materials or evidence that indicates non-human intelligence, if such a thing exists, I would love to see it. I haven't. And the second thing is, whatever I'm doing as a scientist, astronomers are looking at the sky all the time. I'm also doing that, but I'm focusing on objects near Earth rather than far away. I was never asked to hide any of that data that we are collecting, and so far, so I still feel as a real scientist, not obligated by non-disclosure agreements.
Final question. We're hitting our hour mark. I'm going to steal it. This one comes from me. Avi, how are you going to feel if this turns out to be just a comet of totally natural origin? Are you going to be disappointed?
I actually asked myself this question. I will not be scientifically disappointed, because whatever it is, it's better for us to know, if. But for the benefit of humanity, I think we desperately need a wake-up call that will bring us to our senses and change our priorities. And if we realize that we have some sibling out there that is even more accomplished than we are, I think it will inspire us to do better, to explore space. Perhaps it will convince us that we are all in the same boat, all humans here on Earth, and we should cooperate. So this is really the kind of message that I hope will come out of an encounter, and will change us for the better, because we will feel connected as part of the human species, and we might want to imitate whatever we find, our partner. It's sort of like actually meeting an inspiring partner in a blind date. That is the kind of experience I'm hoping for. But of course, on a blind date, you may encounter a serial killer, in which case the response will be quite different. Either way, I think it will be transformative for us. The worst we can do is ignore that possibility and basically say everything in the sky is rocks, as if every blind date we would have would be with a rock on the other side. That's not only boring, but it's also probably wrong, because we launched technological equipment to space, and why do we? And it's very arrogant of us to assume that we are the smartest in cosmic history in our neighborhood. And I strongly believe that Elon Musk is not the most accomplished space entrepreneur since the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago.
Well, Avi, thank you so much for doing this. I would love to do this again. After we have a bit more of this data back, maybe December 19th timeframe.
Yeah, let's do
This
that.
is something we could do again, because
Yeah.
just so
maybe
many
not on
people have questions.
I should let you on the 19th celebrate birthday, but
Please.
yeah, anytime around that.
How about the 20th?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I'll be delighted to do it. Yeah.
Okay. Avi, thank you so much. And thanks all of you for watching, for your great questions. I'm so sorry I couldn't get to all of them. This is my very first live stream that I'm doing all by myself. So I'm trying to talk to Avi and go through your questions at the same time. So thank you for bearing with me. And Avi, thank you so much for just for being you and for being willing to answer some of the tougher questions that I know you say you've got skin of titanium, but I appreciate you letting me challenge you and letting other people just ask whatever they want you. Not everybody is game to do that.
Anytime, and I'll be delighted to do it again anytime.
Okay, Avi, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.